We are taught that faith is the evidence of things not seen. We are taught that man was created in God's image, and that we alone possess the spark of the divine. But what if we aren't the only ones praying in the dark? Today's story is going to challenge everything you believe, religious or not. It comes from a man named Thomas, a former missionary who vanished into the Canadian wilderness in 1983. He was declared dead. A funeral was held, but Thomas wasn't dead. He was living in a sanctuary that isn't marked on any map. He lived for 40 years among a tribe of Sasquatch, not as a prisoner, but as a witness. And what he saw them doing every morning at sunrise what he saw them worshipping suggests that God might be much older and much terrifying than the Bible ever told us. This is his confession. Prepare your soul. Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. That's how I used to start my days. But I haven't said those words in a long time. Not because I stopped believing in sin, but because I realized that the one listening doesn't care about our clumsy human apologies. My name is Thomas. In 1983, I was 32 years old, a Jesuit priest fresh out of seminary, burning with the fire of righteousness. I was arrogant. I thought I carried God in my backpack like a packed lunch. My order sent me to the Yukon Territory, to the edge of the known world. My mission was to make contact with a remote band of First Nations people who had reportedly moved deep into the interior to avoid the government schools. I was supposed to bring them the good news. I was supposed to save their souls. I hired a bush pilot to drop me off at a lake near the Peel River watershed. I had a canoe, 60 pounds of supplies, my breviary, and a rifle I barely knew how to use. I waved goodbye to the plane as it buzzed away, the sound fading into the vast, crushing silence of the north. I remember feeling a thrill. I was Paul in the wilderness. I was Xavier in the east. 3 days later, the river took me. It wasn't a mistake I made. It was the land. A submerged log, invisible in the glacial silt, caught the keel of my canoe in a fast rapid. The boat flipped instantly. The water was so cold it felt like being stabbed by 1,000 knives. It sucked the air right out of my lungs. I tumbled through the white water, smashing against rocks, swallowing ice. I remember seeing my pack and my Bible floating away. I remember grabbing for a root ball on the bank. Then, the lights went out. I should have died. By all medical logic, I did die. Hypothermia in those waters takes minutes. But I didn't wake up at the pearly gates. I woke up in a cathedral. But it wasn't built of stone and glass. It was built of cedar and shadow. And the face looking down at me wasn't an angel. It was a nightmare. A face covered in dark hair, with eyes like burning coal, and a mouth that could crush a human skull like a grape. But it wasn't biting me. It was breathing on me, warming me. And when it saw my eyes open, it didn't roar. It looked up at the sky, raised a massive, hairy hand, and made a sound I will never forget. It was giving thanks. It was praying. I spent the next 4 decades trying to understand who it was praying to. And the answer the answer is the reason I can never step foot in a church again. The Yukon doesn't hate you. That's the first mistake people make. They think the wilderness is cruel. It's not. It's indifferent. It looks at a man the same way it looks at a stone or a leaf. If you float, good. If you sink, the river keeps flowing. I was a man who believed in providence. I believed that because I was carrying the cross, no harm could befall me. I was on a holy mission, after all. God wouldn't let his messenger drown in a nameless tributary 300 miles from civilization. That arrogance was the last warm thing I felt for a very long time. The accident happened on the 3rd afternoon. The river, which had been wide and lazy, suddenly narrowed. The banks rose up into granite cliffs, funneling the water into a chute of white foam. I should have portaged. I should have pulled the canoe out and walked. But I was in a hurry to save souls. I saw the V-shape in the water too late. A submerged log, stripped of bark, hard as iron. The impact sound was like a gunshot. Crack. The canoe didn't just tip. It disintegrated, the wood shattered, and I was thrown into the churn. The shock of glacial water is not cold, it is fire. It burns the skin instantly. My chest seized up in a spasm so violent I thought my ribs had cracked. I tried to gasp for air, but I swallowed water heavy, silty, freezing water. I tumbled. The river played with me, up, down, spinning. My heavy wool coat, which was supposed to keep me warm, became an anchor dragging me down. My boots were lead weights. I remember seeing the surface above me, a shimmering sheet of mercury, getting further and further away. I saw my waterproof bag, the one containing my Bible and my chalice, drift past me. I reached for it. My fingers were stiff claws. I missed it. I watched the Word of God float away downstream. Then, I hit the bottom. Darkness. Rocks. Then nothing. I don't know how long I was dead. And I say dead because I know what drowning feels like. I know when the brain shuts off. The next sensation I had was not sight. It was smell. It was a thick, pungent odor. Musk, pine resin, wet fur, and something else. Something metallic, like blood. I tried to breathe, and my lungs rattled. I coughed, vomiting water. The pain was absolute. Every nerve ending in my body was screaming as the blood started to flow back into my frozen limbs. The thaw is worse than the freeze. It feels like your veins are filled with broken glass. I opened my eyes. I was lying on a surface that was soft but scratchy, fur, piles of it. I was in a cave, but it wasn't dark. A fire was burning nearby, a small, smokeless fire made of very dry wood, carefully stacked. The light threw long, dancing shadows on the stone walls. I tried to sit up. My head swam. I collapsed back onto the furs. God, I whispered. My voice was a broken croak. My. A shadow moved across the firelight. It was massive. It blotted out the ceiling. I shrank back, pushing myself against the cold rock wall. A bear. It had to be a bear. I had survived the river only to be eaten in a den. But bears don't build fires. The figure turned. It walked onto legs, but with a heavy, rolling gait. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall. Its shoulders were impossibly wide, covered in matted, dark hair that shimmered with a reddish hue in the firelight. It stepped closer. I closed my eyes and began to recite the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven. I waited for the claws. I waited for the teeth. I felt a hand touch my chest. It was heavy, the size of a catcher's mitt, but the touch was gentle. It rested over my heart. I opened my eyes. The face was inches from mine. It wasn't a monster. It was a face. Dark skin, leathery and wrinkled like a topographic map. A broad, flat nose, thin lips pressed together in concentration. And eyes. Amber eyes, deep, set under a heavy brow ridge. They weren't the eyes of an animal. Animals look at you and check for two things, threat or food. This creature was checking for something else. It was checking for life. It leaned down. I could smell its breath, warm, smelling of herbs and roots. It placed its ear against my chest, listening to my heartbeat. It grunted. A low, vibrating rumble that I felt in the floor. Then, it sat back on its haunches. It reached for a wooden bowl sitting near the fire. A bowl carved from a burl, rough but functional. It dipped a finger into the bowl and brought it to my lips. Water, warm water, mixed with something sweet. Honey, sap. I licked it. The creature nodded. A very human nod. Drink, the gesture said. It lifted my head with one hand, carefully supporting my neck, and tipped the bowl. I drank greedily. The warmth hit my stomach and radiated out. I looked at him. I knew it was a he, the patriarch. What are you? I whispered. He didn't answer, of course. He just watched me. Then he did something that broke my brain. He reached over to a pile of driftwoods. He selected a piece. He looked at it, turned it in his massive hands, and placed it on the fire. Then he looked up at the smoke rising through a crack in the ceiling. He closed his eyes. He brought his hands together, not palm to palm like we do, but clasping his own wrists over his chest. And he began to hum. It was a low, mournful note. A C minor, maybe. He rocked back and forth slightly. I watched in stunned silence. He was praying. I am a priest. I know the posture of prayer. I know the energy of it. The submission to a higher power. The gratitude. He wasn't just warming himself. He was thanking the fire, or thanking the river for sparing me, or thanking something I couldn't see. Here I was, the Jesuit, the scholar, the bearer of the truth, and I was lying in the dirt, shivering, watching a myth perform a liturgy. The theological implications hit me harder than the hypothermia. The church says animals have no souls. They operate on instinct. They cannot know God because they cannot comprehend the abstract. But this. This was ritual. This was gratitude. If he could pray. Did he have a soul? And if he had a soul, why wasn't he in Genesis? Why wasn't he in the ark? Was he Cain? Was he a Nephilim? Or was he something else entirely, something God made and kept secret? He stopped humming. He opened his eyes and looked at me. He pointed to the fire, then to me. You. Stay. The gesture seemed to say. Then he stood up. The sheer size of him was terrifying. He was a mountain of muscle and hair. He walked to the entrance of the cave. He paused, grabbed a spear, yes, a spear, a sharpened sapling with a stone tip lashed to it, and looked back. He made a soft chattering sound. Woo-woo-woo. It sounded like a mother comforting a child. Then he stepped out into the snow. I was alone. I looked around the cave. It wasn't just a hole, it was a home. There were bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling. There were piles of furs, wolf, elk, bear arranged into beds. There were tools, stone scrapers, wooden bowls. And in the corner, on a flat shelf of rock, there was an arrangement. I crawled over to it, dragging my weak legs. It was an altar. There were no crosses, no statues. It was a collection of things, a perfect white river stone, a shed antler, a dried flower, a skull of a bird, and in the center ... a piece of gold, not a coin, a raw nugget, the size of a walnut. It wasn't sitting there as treasure. It was sitting there as a pretty rock, just another creation. To him, the gold had the same value as the bird skull. Zero monetary value, infinite spiritual value. I slumped back against the wall, clutching the furs around me. I had come to the Yukon to bring God to the savages. But as I stared at that simple, pure altar, a terrifying thought took root in my mind. I hadn't brought God here. God was already here. And he had been here a lot longer than I had. That was the first night. I thought I was a guest. I thought he would help me heal and then point me toward the nearest settlement. I didn't know that the river had frozen over while I slept. I didn't know that winter had snapped the valley shut like a steel trap. I wasn't going anywhere. I was about to spend the long dark with the patriarch. And he had a lot more to teach me than just how to build a fire. In the seminary, we studied linguistics. We learned Greek, Latin, Hebrew. We learned that language is the vessel of truth. In the beginning was the Word, St. John tells us. We believe that to name a thing is to have dominion over it. Adam named the animals, and thus, he was their master. But what happens when you meet a creature that refuses to be named? What happens when you are the one being categorized? I woke up to the smell of rendering fat. My fever had broken, leaving me weak and hollowed out. The pain in my limbs had settled into a deep, bruising ache. I opened my eyes and realized the cave had become crowded. The patriarch was there, tending the fire. But he wasn't alone. To his left sat a female. She was slightly smaller than him, maybe 7 feet, with lighter fur, streaked with gray like ash. Her face was sharper, her eyes more guarded. She looked at me not with curiosity, but with suspicion. The way a mother wolf looks at a strange pup that has wandered into the den. Behind her, peeking out from the shadows, was a younger one. An adolescent, I guessed, lanky, all arms and legs, with bright, inquisitive eyes that blinked rapidly. I sat up, clutching the furs to my chest. My black clerical shirt was ruined, torn and stiff with dried river mud. My collar, the white plastic tab that marked me as a servant of Rome, was gone. Lost in the current. Without my vestments, without my Bible, I felt naked. I was just a man. "Good morning," I said. My voice was raspy. "I mean you no harm." The sound of English in that stone chamber felt absurd. It sounded tinny, artificial. The patriarch looked at me. He didn't react to the words, he reacted to the tone. He grunted a soft, affirmative sound and pointed to the fire. The matriarch, I named her Martha in my head, after the biblical figure who busied herself with serving, snorted. She picked up a stone scraper and went back to cleaning a hide, ignoring me pointedly. The young one, I called him Timothy, crept closer. He reached out a long, hairy finger and poked my boot. Poke. I flinched. He jumped back, chattering a high-pitched laugh. Hick, kick, kick. I tried to establish communication. I pointed to myself. "Thomas," I said. I tapped my chest. "Thomas." Then I pointed to the patriarch. He watched me. He tilted his massive head. He didn't say his name. He didn't grunt. Instead, he took a deep breath, his chest expanding like a bellows, and released a sound that I didn't hear with my ears. I felt it in my sternum, thrum, a low-frequency vibration. It wasn't a word, it was a signature. It carried an emotion, strength, protection. "Father." I pointed to the matriarch. She didn't look up, but she emitted a different vibration, sharp, quick. "Caution, home, mother." I realized then that I was at the Tower of Babel. I was trying to use bricks and mortar words to build a bridge to beings who communicated with the bedrock itself. I gave up on names. I tried symbols. I found 2 small sticks on the floor. I stripped them of bark. I used a piece of grass to lash them together. A cross. It was crude, pathetic, but it was the symbol of my salvation. I held it up, Jesus, I whispered. Christos. I looked at them, waiting for a spark of recognition. Maybe they had seen missionaries before. Maybe the truth is written on the heart of every living thing. The patriarch looked at the cross. He reached out and took it from my hand. His fingers were so large the cross looked like a toothpick. He examined it, he sniffed it. Then, he tossed it onto the fire. It flared up for a second, turned to ash, and was gone. He didn't do it out of malice. He didn't do it to mock my faith. He did it because it was just a stick. To him, it was fuel. He looked at me, saw my horror, and seemed confused. He picked up a piece of dried meat, venison jerky, and handed it to me. Eat, his eyes said. Wood is for burning. Meat is for life. I ate the meat. It was tough, unseasoned, and tasted of smoke. It was the best thing I had ever eaten. As I chewed, I cried. Silent tears rolling down into my beard. I cried because my symbol was gone. I cried because I was insignificant. The patriarch saw my tears. He leaned forward and made a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a growl, it was a purr. A deep, rumbling purr that traveled through the floor and into my body. It was comforting, it was physical empathy. He didn't need a cross to show compassion. He was the compassion. The days turned into weeks. The snow outside piled up, sealing the valley. I became the run of the pack. I couldn't hunt, I was too slow, too noisy. I couldn't carry heavy loads. I was useless, but they kept me. Martha eventually tolerated me. She let me help her sort the berries and nuts they had stored. I learned to separate the good roots from the rot. Timothy became my shadow. He was fascinated by my hands, my small, hairless, dexterous fingers. He would watch me tie knots or braid grass, mesmerized. But the real education happened at night. After the meal, when the fire burned low, the talking began. They didn't tell stories like we do. We say, once upon a time. We create a narrative distance. They engaged in shared memory. The patriarch would start humming. The others would join in. And in the semi-darkness of the cave, the sound would induce hallucinations. No, not hallucinations. Impressions. I would close my eyes and see images. A herd of caribou crossing a river. A storm breaking a tree. The moon turning red. I realized they were transmitting data. They were uploading the day's events, or the history of the tribe, into the collective consciousness. I was receiving the signal, but the reception was fuzzy. My brain wasn't wired for their bandwidth. But I felt the emotions. I felt the hunger of the winter. I felt the joy of the spring thaw. I felt the fear of the Thunderbird's airplanes. One night, about a month in, I tried to join the circle. I started to hum a Gregorian chant, Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy. The patriarch stopped. The cave went silent. They looked at me. I kept singing. My voice was thin, wavering, bouncing off the cold stone, Christe eleison. I closed my eyes, pouring my loneliness, my fear, my lost faith into the melody. When I finished, I waited for them to laugh, or to ignore me. I opened my eyes. Timothy was looking at me with wide eyes. Martha had stopped working. The patriarch looked at me with a new expression, respect. He nodded slowly. Then, he repeated the melody back to me, perfectly. He hummed the Kyrie, but he dropped it 3 octaves. He turned my plea for mercy into a foundational rumble. He took my song and added it to their library. He accepted my offering. That night, I didn't sleep near the wall. Martha pushed a pile of furs closer to the center, near Timothy. I was no longer the stranger. I was the strange, hairless uncle who knew a sad song. I fell asleep feeling the heat of their bodies, the smell of musk and wood smoke filling my lungs. I dreamt of a church, but the roof was the sky, and the pillars were cedar trees, and the congregation was covered in fur. And for the first time since the accident, I didn't pray for rescue. I prayed for understanding. But the peace of the cave was fragile, because while they accepted me, I was still a man. And men carry a scent that attracts darkness. I didn't know it then, but something else was watching the cave. Something that didn't pray, and the God the patriarch worshipped. I was about to meet him face to face. You see, the Bible tells us that God is love, but in the deep woods, God is not love. God is authority, and authority demands blood. In the Bible, we talk about fasting as a spiritual discipline. We choose to abstain to purify the soul. But forced starvation is not spiritual. It is a slow, grinding madness. It strips away your humanity layer by layer until all that is left is a mouth and a stomach. January came down on us like an iron hammer. the temperatures dropped to 40 below zero. The game vanished. The caribou herds moved south. The hares stayed in their burrows. We were trapped in the cathedral of ice. The patriarch changed. His gentle demeanor evaporated. He became grim, silent. He spent hours staring into the dying embers of the fire, his massive chest rising and falling in shallow, conserving breaths. Martha stopped nursing Timothy. She had no milk. The boy lay curled in a ball, shivering, his bright eyes dull and glassy. I tried to pray, "Give us this day our daily bread." But the bread didn't come, and God felt very far away. On the 9th day without a kill, the patriarch stood up. He didn't take his spear. He took a heavy club of femur bone of a moose, hardened by fire and age. He looked at me, then he looked at Timothy. There was a look in his eyes that chilled my blood. It wasn't love, it was calculation. He signaled to me, "Come." He signaled to Martha, "Stay, guard." I wrapped my furs around me, my feet numb in the makeshift moccasins Martha had sewn for me. I followed him out into the white void. We walked for hours. The snow was waist-deep for me, knee-deep for him. He broke the trail, plowing through the drifts like an icebreaker. We weren't hunting. There were no tracks. We were patrolling, or so I thought. Then, a miracle, or a curse, we stumbled upon a moose. An old bull, trapped in a ravine, exhausted, struggling in deep snow. It was stuck, it was meat, it was salvation. 500 pounds of protein. I felt a surge of primal joy. I wanted to weep. We would live. Timothy would live. The patriarch didn't hesitate. He descended into the ravine. The bull thrashed, but it was too weak. One swing of the bone club, a sickening crack, and it was over. The silence returned. I scrambled down, knife in hand, a sharp flint stone, ready to dress the carcass. My mouth was watering. I could already taste the warm liver. "We eat," I rasped, pointing to the beast. The patriarch grabbed my wrist. His grip was bruising. He shook his head. "No," he pointed up, toward the peak of the mountain that loomed over our valley. A jagged spire of black rock that pierced the clouds. "Up," he grunted. I stared at him. "Why? It's too heavy. We can't carry it up there. We eat here." He shoved me back. He hoisted the entire moose carcass, hundreds of pounds of dead weight, onto his shoulders. His knees buckled, then straightened. The strength was impossible. It was hysterical strength. He began to climb. I followed, confused, angry. Why were we walking away from the cave? Why were we taking the food away from the starving child? The climb took 3 hours. It was a death march. My lungs burned. I hallucinated warmth. We reached a plateau near the summit. The wind here was a hurricane. It scoured the rock clean of snow. In the center of the plateau was a fissure. A deep, dark crack in the mountain, smelling of sulfur and rot. A vent, a cave. The patriarch walked to the edge of the fissure. He dropped the moose. He didn't butcher it. He didn't take a bite. He arranged it. He straightened the legs. He turned the head to face the darkness of the hole. An offering. He stepped back and pulled me with him. We hid behind a boulder, 30 yards away. He pressed my face into the snow. "Watch," his vibration said. "Fear." I watched. I expected a wolf pack, a wolverine. What came out of that hole? It defies biology. It started with a smell. A stench so foul it made the sulfur seem sweet. It smelled of ancient death, of meat that has liquefied. Then, a hand. A hand the size of a shovel, covered in white, mange-ridden fur. It gripped the edge of the fissure. Then another hand. And then, the head. It was a Sasquatch. But it was wrong. It was gargantuan. Easily 12 feet tall, but it was twisted. Its spine was hunched. Its fur was patchy, revealing gray, scarred skin. Its eyes were milky white, blind. It was the eater. A genetic anomaly, an ancient ancestor that refused to die. A cannibal king, I don't know. But the patriarch, my strong, noble protector, was trembling beside me. He was shaking like a leaf. The giant creature dragged itself out of the hole. It moved with a jerky, spasmodic speed. It sniffed the air. It ignored the wind. It smelled the blood. It found the moose. It didn't eat it like an animal. It tore it apart with a violence that seemed personal. It crushed the bones in its jaws. It swallowed chunks of meat whole. It was consuming our salvation. Every bite it took was a day of life for Timothy. Every bone it cracked was a meal for Martha. And we watched, starving, freezing, offering our daily bread to this monster. Why didn't the patriarch fight? He was strong. Then I realized. The giant stopped eating. It lifted its head. It sniffed again. It smelled us. It turned its blind, milky eyes toward our boulder. It let out a scream, a high, thin shriek that sounded like a woman dying. The patriarch pressed himself flat. He began to hum, not the prayer song, the submission song, a low, whimpering drone. I am small. I am nothing. I obey. The giant listened. It recognized the submission. It grunted. It dragged the rest of the moose back into its hole. It vanished. We waited for an hour before moving. We walked back down the mountain in silence. We returned to the cave empty-handed. Martha looked at the patriarch. She smelled the blood on him. She saw no meat. She looked at his eyes. She understood. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just hugged Timothy tighter and rocked him. They accepted him. That night, I sat in the corner, trying to process the theology of what I had just seen. I had preached that God provides, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. But here in the deep woods God doesn't provide. God takes. God is the mouth at the top of the mountain. And you feed him, or he comes down and eats you. It wasn't love, it wasn't worship, it was a protection racket. The patriarch wasn't a priest, he was a taxpayer. And he had just paid the tithe so that the thing on the mountain wouldn't come for his son. I looked at the altar in the corner, the gold nugget, the bird skull. They weren't gifts of gratitude. They were bribes. Please, take this shiny thing. Please, take this meat. Just don't take us. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the weather. I had lost my Bible. I had lost my cross. And now, watching Timothy whimper in his sleep from hunger, I was losing my definition of holy. Because if God is all-powerful, and God allows this, then God is not the shepherd. God is the wolf. I survived the winter. We survived by eating bark and lichen and, eventually, a scrawny wolf that wandered too close. But I never looked at the patriarch the same way again. I saw the fear in him, and I realized that my mission wasn't to convert him to Jesus. It was to save him from his God. I decided then. I was going to kill the thing on the mountain. It was the only Christian thing to do. Spring in the north is violent. It doesn't arrive gently, it breaks the door down. The river roared back to life, tearing huge chunks of ice from the banks. The sun returned, staying longer each day, turning the gray world into a blinding green. The tribe rejoiced. The patriarch caught salmon in the river, his massive hands moving faster than the fish. Martha actually laughed as Timothy chased butterflies in the meadow. They forgot the winter, they forgot the hunger, they forgot the monster on the mountain. That is the gift of the animal mind, the ability to live entirely in the now. But I am a man, and men live in the tomorrow. I knew the winter would come again. I knew the hunger would return. And I knew that the eater, that abomination in the high cave, was waiting for its next tithe. I couldn't enjoy the peace. Every time I looked at Timothy growing stronger, I just saw fat and veal. I decided to act. I didn't have my rifle. I didn't have a bow. Against a creature that stood 12 feet tall and could snap a moose's spine, a spear was a toothpick. But I had something else. I had education. The Jesuits pride themselves on being men of science as well as faith. I knew botany. I knew the flora of the taiga. I knew about Aconitum delphinifolium, monkshood, wolfsbane. It grew in the shady patches near the tree line. Beautiful, hooded purple flowers. To the tribe, it was just a weed. To me, it was an arsenal. The roots contain aconitine, a potent neurotoxin. In sufficient doses, it causes paralysis, cardiac arrhythmia, and death. It stops the heart while the brain remains fully conscious. It was a cruel way to die, but fitting for a cruel God. I began my work in secret. I told Martha I was gathering roots for dye to color the furs. She seemed pleased that the runt was finally being useful. I dug up the tubers, careful not to touch them with my bare skin. I carried them to a secluded spot downriver, away from the cave. I found a flat stone and a round river rock. I began to grind. I turned the roots into a thick, white paste. I mixed it with fat to bind it. I was making a poison apple. My plan was simple. The next time the patriarch prepared a carcass for the offering, I would lace the meat. The eater would swallow it whole. And then, the tyranny would end. But secrets are hard to keep from telepaths. One afternoon, I was at my grinding stone, sweating, focused on the paste. A shadow fell over me. I froze. I turned around. The patriarch was standing there. He wasn't angry. He was confused. He sniffed the air. He smelled the acrid, bitter scent of the aconite. He knew that smell. Every creature in the forest knows to avoid it. He pointed to the paste. Then he pointed to his mouth and made a gagging face. Poison. Bad. Death. He thought I was making a mistake. He thought I was going to eat it. He reached out to kick the stone over, to save me from my stupidity. No, I shouted. I threw myself over the stone, shielding the poison. He stopped. He looked at me, his amber eyes narrowing. I stood up. I had to explain. I pointed to the paste, then I pointed up. Toward the mountain peak. I mimicked the eater. I hunched my back. I made my eyes go blank. I clawed at the air. Then I pointed to the paste again, and then I made a gesture of falling down dead. Poison for him. The patriarch went still. The vibration coming off him changed. It wasn't fear this time. It was horror. He stepped back as if I had just turned into a demon. He shook his head violently. No, no, no. He started to hum, a frantic, dissonant sound. He was trying to tell me something profound. I closed my eyes to receive the image. I saw the mountain. I saw the eater dead, but then I saw the sky turn black. I saw the ground shake. I saw the other tribes, thousands of them wailing in grief. He was telling me that the eater wasn't just a bully, he was a keystone. In their theology, the eater held the anger of the mountain. He contained the evil. If you kill the vessel, the evil spills out and infects everything. It was a containment strategy. They fed the beast to keep the chaos localized. Superstition, I yelled at him. It's just a monster. It eats your children. I pointed at Timothy, who was playing by the river. He eats your son. The patriarch looked at Timothy. A spasm of pain crossed his face. But he shook his head again. He pointed to the sky. Order, balance. He reached for the poison again. He was going to destroy it. He couldn't let me break the covenant. I did the only thing I could do. I grabbed the stone covered in toxic paste and I held it up, threatening to throw it into the river. If you stop me, I said, my voice shaking, I will poison the water. I will kill the fish. I will kill everything. It was a bluff. A terrible, sinful bluff, but he didn't know that. He looked at me with betrayal. He looked at the runt he had saved from the ice. And he saw a madman. He lowered his hands. He stepped back. He turned his back on me. It was a shunning. He was washing his hands of me. Do what you will, metal man, but you walk alone. He walked away. I fell to my knees, sobbing. I had just severed the bond with the only being who had shown me kindness in a year. But I was a soldier of God, and soldiers have to make hard choices. I scraped the poison into a birch bark container. I hid it in a hollow tree, and I waited. Summer passed. The days grew shorter again. The anxiety returned. In late September, the sign came. We heard the shriek from the mountain. Scree, hunger. The eater was awake. The patriarch stood up in the cave. He looked old, tired. He picked up his bone club. He looked at Timothy. Timothy was bigger now, fatter. A prime offering. Martha began to wail softly. The patriarch looked at me. His eyes were dead. He was going to do it. He was going to hunt for the tithe. I stood up. I'll come, I said. He didn't stop me. He didn't acknowledge me. We hunted a caribou. It was a clean kill. While the patriarch was binding the legs to carry it, I made my move. Water, I signaled. Wash the wound. He stepped away to the creek to wash the blood from his hands. I pulled the birch bark container from my tunic. I smeared the white paste deep inside the open chest cavity of the caribou. I rubbed it into the liver, the heart, the lungs. I used it all. Enough poison to kill a regiment of men. I closed the ribcage. When the patriarch returned, I was standing back, innocent. He hoisted the caribou. We began the climb. It felt like the Stations of the Cross. Every step up that mountain was a step toward judgment. Was I David facing Goliath, or was I Judas betraying the natural order? We reached the plateau. The smell of rot was there, waiting. The patriarch dropped the carcass. He stepped back, but this time, I didn't hide. I stood next to the carcass. The patriarch hissed at me. Hide, run, no, I whispered. I want to see him die. The eater emerged. It was even bigger than I remembered. The summer had not been kind to it. Its skin was hanging loose, its sores were weeping. It was starving, it ignored us. It went straight for the meat. It tore into the chest cavity. It took a massive bite of the liver, the poisoned liver. I held my breath. It chewed. It swallowed. It took another bite, then it stopped. It dropped the meat. It let out a sound that wasn't a scream. It was a gurgle. It clawed at its throat. The aconite works fast on the heart. The giant swayed. It looked confused. Its milky eyes rolled back. It turned toward us. It couldn't see us, but it knew. It took a step toward the patriarch. It raised a massive fist to crush him. Then, it collapsed. It hit the ground like a falling tower. The earth shook. It twitched once, twice, then stillness. I let out a breath I had been holding for 6 months. It's done, I said. He's dead. You're free. I turned to the patriarch, expecting relief, expecting gratitude. The patriarch was on his knees. But he wasn't celebrating. He was covering his head with his arms. He was wailing. And then I felt it. The ground didn't stop shaking. The death of the eater hadn't silenced the mountain. It had woken up something else. From the fissure the hole the eater came from a sound emerged. Not a scream, a chittering. Thousands of small, clicking sounds. Like a hive, I walked to the edge and looked down. The eater wasn't the only thing in the hole. He was the cork. He was the cannibal king who kept the others down. He ate them to keep the population in check. With him dead, the swarm was free. I saw eyes. Hundreds of glowing red eyes in the darkness below. Smaller ones, faster ones. Oh God, I whispered. I hadn't killed the dragon. I had opened the gates of hell. We talk about the ecosystem of evil. We think we can just surgically remove the bad parts. But nature is a web. The patriarch knew. He knew that a tyrant brings order. I killed the tyrant, and I brought chaos. In the book of Revelation, a star falls from heaven and opens the bottomless pit, releasing locusts with the power of scorpions. I used to think that was allegory. I used to preach it as a symbol of moral decay. But standing on that ridge, watching the fissure erupt, I realized St. John wasn't writing poetry. He was writing a field report. The things that came out of the hole weren't Sasquatch. They were degenerates. Imagine a man stripped of all dignity, hunched, emaciated, skin the color of a maggot, eyes sealed shut by centuries of darkness. They moved on all fours, scurrying like spiders. They were small, maybe 5 feet tall, but there were hundreds of them. They flowed over the body of the dead eater like a wave of white water. Within seconds, the massive carcass was gone, stripped to the bone. Then, they turned their heads. They didn't have eyes, but they had massive, bat-like ears. They twitched. They heard my heartbeat. The patriarch grabbed me. He didn't look at me with anger. There was no time for judgment. He looked at me with pure survival instinct. He hoisted me under his arm like a sack of flour and jumped. We didn't climb down the mountain. We fell down it. He leapt from ledge to ledge, sliding down shale slopes, crashing through the scrub cedar. Behind us, the sound of the swarm was like a landslide of dry bones. Click-clack scree. They were fast, faster than him. The cave, I screamed, bouncing against his ribs. We have to get to the cave, he roared, a sound of warning to Martha miles below. We hit the tree line. The shadows of the forest helped us slightly. The swarm seemed momentarily confused by the complex acoustics of the trees. The patriarch didn't stop. He bulldozed through the undergrowth, ignoring the branches whipping his face. We burst into the valley clearing. Martha was outside, holding Timothy. She had heard the roar. She smelled the aconite on us. She smelled the fear. She didn't ask questions. She grabbed the boy and dove into the cave. The patriarch threw me in after them. Then he turned. He grabbed a massive boulder that sat near the entrance, a rock I couldn't have moved with a lever, and rolled it. Brian. He slammed it into the opening, sealing us in. Darkness. We lay there in the pitch black, panting. The air was thick with the smell of our sweat and the metallic tang of adrenaline. Did we lose them? I whispered. Thump. Something hit the rock from the outside. Scratch. Scratch. Then a hiss. Then another thump. And another. It sounded like rain, if rain was made of claws. They were here. The Legion. The patriarch lit the fire. His hands were shaking. The light flared up, illuminating the cave. It was a fortress, but it had weaknesses. The smoke hole in the ceiling. The gaps around the boulder. We saw fingers. Pale, long, skeletal fingers poking through the cracks, feeling for flesh. Martha screamed a high, terrifying sound. She grabbed a burning brand from the fire and jammed it into the gap. Outside, a shriek of pain, the fingers retracted. But more came. They were digging. They were chewing the rock. I looked at the patriarch. He was bleeding. A gash on his leg from the descent. He looked at me. I expected him to kill me. I expected him to throw me to the wolves to buy time for his family. It would have been justice. I had killed their guardian. I had broken the seal. Instead, he pointed to the back of the cave, where the pile of spears lay. He handed me one. Then he pointed to the smoke hole in the ceiling, the chimney. A pale face was peering down, its mouth full of needle teeth, drooling thick saliva. Fight, his eyes said. We die together. The night that followed was the longest of my life. It was a siege. They tried to come down the chimney. I stood on a rock ledge, stabbing upward with the spear every time a shadow blocked the stars. I felt the tip sink into soft flesh. I felt the hot blood rain down on my face. I stabbed and stabbed until my shoulders burned, reciting the rosary like a madman. Hail Mary, full of grace. Stad. The Lord is with thee. Stad. The patriarch and Martha held the entrance. The boulder shook under the weight of the swarm pushing against it. The patriarch braced his massive back against the stone, his feet digging furrows into the dirt floor. He roared the infrasound blast. In the confined space, it was deafening. It rattled my teeth. It made my nose bleed. Outside, the swarm shrieked in confusion, their echolocation disrupted by the sonic wave, but they kept coming. They were hungry. They had been starving in the dark for centuries, fed only scraps by the eater. Now they wanted the main course. Around 3 a.m., the fire began to die. We were running out of wood. The light, I yelled. They hate the light. I grabbed my own spare clothes, my flannel shirts, my spare trousers, and threw them on the fire. They flared up bright and hot. Then I grabbed the furs from my bed. Martha saw what I was doing. She understood. She grabbed the bedding, the dried herbs, anything flammable. We were burning our survival to buy minutes. In the light of the burning elk hide, I saw Timothy. He was huddled in the furthest corner, pressing himself into a crack in the wall. He was holding something, my Bible, the one I had lost in the river. No, it was gone. He was holding a piece of bark. He had drawn on it with charcoal. He had drawn the cross. He was holding it up toward the shaking boulder, mimicking what he had seen me do months ago. He was praying to my God. He was praying to the God of the man who had just doomed them all. The irony broke me. I dropped my spear. I fell to my knees. I'm sorry, I sobbed. I'm so sorry. I had come to save them from paganism. Instead, I had delivered them to demons. The patriarch saw me crumble. He left the boulder for a second, risking everything, and grabbed me by the collar of my tunic. He hauled me up. He shook me. He slapped my face. Crack. It wasn't abuse. It was a reset. He pointed to the spear. Not done, his vibration commanded. Fight. He dragged me back to the smoke hole. Just in time. 3 of the pale things had dropped down. They were inside. They were small, but fast. They hissed, baring teeth that looked like serrated obsidian. One lunged at me. I didn't think. I didn't pray. I swung the spear like a baseball bat. The wood connected with its skull. Crunch. It shrieked and scrabbled away. The patriarch grabbed the second one. He didn't use a weapon. He grabbed it by the neck and the leg. He twisted. The sound was like a wet branch snapping. He tossed the broken body into the fire. The smell of burning hair filled the cave. The third one went for Timothy. Martha was there. She didn't act like a human mother. She acted like a grizzly bear. She intercepted the creature, taking a bite to her forearm that tore the muscle open. She didn't even flinch. She slammed the creature against the wall and crushed its chest with her fist. She stood over her son, dripping blood, roaring a sound that was pure, ancient rage. The sun came up. We didn't know it at first. We just noticed that the scratching stopped. The pale things were subterranean. They couldn't handle UV light. It burned their translucent skin. They retreated back to the mountain, back to the shadows. Silence returned to the valley. We pushed the boulder aside. The clearing was a slaughterhouse. There were a dozen dead creatures lying in the snow, their bodies rapidly decaying into a black sludge. But the cost? Martha was badly wounded. Her arm was shredded. The patriarch was exhausted, his eyes sunken, his fur singed. Our food was gone. Our bedding was burnt. And the mountain. The mountain was buzzing. We could hear them up there. The Legion. They weren't gone. They were just sleeping, waiting for sunset. I looked at the patriarch. I waited for him to exile me, to kill me. He looked at the mountain. Then he looked at me. He walked over to the river. He washed the black sludge off his hands. He turned to the south. He pointed. Go, he signed. Not exile, migration. We couldn't stay here. The sanctuary was defiled. The fortress had fallen. We had to move. But moving meant walking through the open forest, exposed, with a wounded female and a child, while 1,000 demons waited for nightfall. I caused the exodus. I turned them into refugees in their own land. And that walk. That long march south. That is where I learned the true meaning of sacrifice. Because the Legion didn't stay on the mountain, they followed us. We walked. That sounds simple. But in 3 feet of snow, with no food, exhausted, and hunted by a subterranean army, walking is not transport, it is agony. We moved south toward the river valley, hoping the running water would cut our scent or provide a barrier the swarm couldn't cross. The patriarch led the way, breaking the trail. I followed in his wake, stumbling, my lungs burning in the cold air. Timothy walked behind me, clutching my tunic, whimpering softly. Martha brought up the rear. She was dying. The bite on her arm had turned black. The sepsis was moving fast. I could smell the sweet, sickly scent of gangrene mixing with the crisp pine air. She stumbled often. Every time she fell, she didn't groan. She just pushed herself up, looked at Timothy, and kept moving. She was the rear guard. She knew that if the Legion caught up, they would hit her first. She was positioning herself as the shield. The sun began to dip. The sky turned bruised purple. The shadows stretched out, looking like claws reaching for us. And then we heard it. Rich scratch, not behind us. Under us. They weren't tracking our footprints. They were tracking our vibration. They were moving through the lava tubes and natural fissures beneath the snow. We were walking on top of the hive. We reached a frozen lake. An open expanse of white, a mile across. The patriarch stopped. He looked at the ice. He looked at the tree line on the other side. Then he looked at Martha. She had collapsed. She was on her knees, breathing in wet, rattling gasps. She couldn't stand. The patriarch went to her. He touched her face. He made a soft sound coo. She looked up at him. Her eyes were glassy, but she smiled. A baring of teeth that wasn't aggression, but peace. She pushed him away. She pointed to Timothy. Then she pointed to the far bank. Go. The patriarch shook his head. He reached down to lift her. She snarled at him. A real, guttural snarl. She refused to be carried. She knew the physics. If he carried her, he would be too slow. They would all die. She was doing the math. 1 life for 3. The ice beneath us cracked. BOM, not from weight, from below. A dark shape smashed through the frozen surface 50 yards away. Then another. The Legion was breaching. They were coming up through the ice like seals, wet, shrieking, hungry, hundreds of them. Martha stood up. I don't know how. It was pure maternal will. She looked at the patriarch. She hit her chest. Thump. Then she pointed at the swarm. She started to sing, not the prayer song, not the submission song. The war song. It was a scream that started low and rose to a shriek that shattered the air. It was a challenge. She was calling them to her. She was making herself the loudest, brightest target in the valley. The patriarch grabbed Timothy, who was trying to run to his mother. He grabbed me by the collar. He ran. We ran across the ice, slipping, falling, scrambling toward the trees. Behind us, the war song was cut short. I looked back. I shouldn't have, but I did. Martha was surrounded. A sea of pale, writhing bodies swarmed over her. She was fighting like a demon. She crushed them, threw them, bit them. She wasn't trying to survive. She was trying to take as many of them with her as she could. She disappeared under the white wave. The ice around her broke, and they all plunged into the black water. Silence. We hit the tree line. The patriarch didn't stop. He didn't look back. He ran until his heart must have been bursting. He ran until we found a high ridge, exposed, windy bad for the swarm. He collapsed in the snow. Timothy curled into a ball against him, shaking violently. I sat apart from them. I felt a sickness that wasn't physical. I had preached about the sacrifice of Christ. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. I had preached it from a pulpit, wearing clean robes, safe. I had just watched a soulless beast live it out in blood and freezing water. Martha was more Christian than I had ever been. She was the martyr. I was just the Pharisee who caused the crucifixion. The night passed in a blur of grief. The Legion didn't follow us up the ridge. Maybe Martha had killed enough of them. Maybe the water had confused them, or maybe they were just full. The patriarch sat staring at the south. He was rocking back and forth. He wasn't humming. He was silent. His silence was louder than any scream. The next morning, the dynamic changed. The patriarch stood up. He looked at me. There was no warmth in his eyes anymore. The uncle was gone. He pointed south. Walk. You walked for 3 weeks. It was a death march. We ate pine bark. We ate larvae from rotten logs. Timothy stopped playing. He stopped looking at me with curiosity. He looked at me with his father's eyes cold, distant. He knew. He knew I had poisoned the eater. He knew I had broken the seal. I was the curse. we finally reached the edge of the territory. The trees changed from black spruce to aspen. The air got warmer. We found a logging road. A muddy, rutted track cut by bulldozers. The patriarch stopped at the edge of the road. He wouldn't cross it. To him, the road was the border of the metal men. It was the edge of the infected world. He dropped his pack. He looked at Timothy. He groomed the boys for one last time, picking out the burrs. Then he turned to me. I expected him to leave me there, to point down the road and say go. But he didn't. He reached into his pouch. He pulled out the gold nugget, the one from the altar. The one I had seen on the first night. He walked over to me. He took my hand. He pressed the gold into my palm. He closed my fingers over it. Then he leaned down, his face inches from mine. He spoke. Not a hum, a word. He had learned one word of my language in all those months. He had saved it for this moment. Pay. I froze. Pay. He wasn't giving me a gift. He was paying me. He was treating me like the eater, like the monster on the mountain. You give the monster gold so it goes away. You give the monster what it wants so it doesn't eat your son. He was buying his son's life from me. Take the gold, metal man, and go. Leave us alone. It broke me. It shattered whatever was left of my faith, my ego, my humanity. I wanted to scream. I'm not the monster. I tried to save you. But looking at his face, the grief, the exhaustion, the fear, I realized I was the monster. I was the invasive species. I was the virus. I took the gold. My hand shook. I'm sorry, I whispered. He didn't answer. He turned his back. He took Timothy's hand. They walked back into the forest. They didn't look back. I watched them until they were just shadows between the trees. Then they were gone. I stood on that logging road for a long time. I looked at the nugget in my hand. It was heavy, cold. It was the price of a soul. I walked down the road. 2 days later, a logging truck picked me up. The driver asked me who I was. He said I looked like a ghost. I am, I said. I didn't go back to the priesthood. How could I? How could I stand in a church and tell people that God is a benevolent Father? I had seen the true face of the wilderness. God is a transaction. Life is a transaction. You pay in blood, or you pay in grief. But you always pay. I kept the gold, not to spend it. I keep it to remind me of my place. I am not the master of the earth. I am not the steward. I am the sickness that had to be bribed to leave. But there is one thing that keeps me awake at night. One thing the patriarch showed me before the end. The swarm. The legion. They didn't die in the cave. And they didn't stay in the Yukon. When I look at the news. When I see the chaos in the world. The mindless consuming. The hunger. I wonder. Did I just release them into the valley? Or did I release them into the world? Re-entry is a lie. Astronauts talk about the atmosphere burning the capsule on the way down. They don't talk about the burn of trying to fit back into a life that no longer fits you. I came back to the world of paved roads and electric lights. The church welcomed me back as a miracle, the priest who returned from the dead. They wanted me to give testimony. They wanted me to preach about the sustaining power of faith in the wilderness. I tried. Once, I stood in the pulpit of a cathedral in Vancouver. I looked out at the sea of faces, clean, well-fed, safe faces. I looked at the crucifix hanging above the altar, the suffering Christ, the Lamb of God, and all I could see was the moose carcass on the mountain. All I could see was the eater. I opened my mouth to say, God is love, but my throat closed. My body physically rejected the lie. I walked out of that mass in the middle of the homily. I never went back. I couldn't be a priest because I no longer believed in the hierarchy. In the civilized world, we think we are at the top. We think we are the shepherds. But I had seen the truth. We are not the shepherds. We are the sheep, and the fence is broken. I took the gold nugget the patriarch gave me. I didn't sell it. I couldn't spend blood money. I moved to a small cabin in Montana, far enough from people to be safe, but close enough to the woods to watch. Because I know they are coming. The Legion. You think I'm crazy? You think the pale thing stayed in that hole in the Yukon? Look around you. Look at the world since 1984. Look at the greed. Look at the consumption. It's ravenous. It's blind. It consumes everything, the forests, the oceans, the future, and it's never full. We act like the eater. We eat until we burst. I have a theory, a theology of nightmares. I think the pale things aren't just physical creatures. I think they are spiritual parasites. I think when I killed the eater, I didn't just release a swarm of animals. I released a frequency, a hunger, and it found us. It found the metal men. It looked at our cities and saw an all-you-can-eat buffet of souls. I see them sometimes, in the eyes of politicians, in the eyes of billionaires, in the eyes of addicts. That milky, blind stare, that desperate, scratching need to consume. We are possessed, and I am the exorcist who failed. I live quietly now. I grow my own food. I don't hunt. I never kill. If a spider comes into my house, I carry it outside. I am trying to balance the ledger. I am trying to pay back the debt of the moose. But at night, at night, I dream of Martha. I see her standing on the ice, the war song ripping from her throat. She didn't fight for a flag. She didn't fight for a dogma. She fought for her son. That was the only holy thing I saw in all my years, the ferocity of love. Our God demands we die for him. Her God demanded she die for her child. Which one is the true religion? I think you know the answer. Sometimes, hikers come by my cabin. They ask about the Bigfoot legend. They want to know if they are monsters. I tell them the truth. No, I say they aren't monsters. They are the immune system. The patriarch wasn't hiding from us because he was afraid. He was quarantining us. He knew we were sick with the hunger. He kept his tribe apart to keep them pure. And I broke the quarantine. I keep the gold inside the book. It's poetic, isn't it? The root of all evil, resting in the Holy of Holies. It reminds me that every religion is built on a transaction. We give devotion, we expect protection. But the patriarch taught me the harsh reality. Protection isn't free, and mercy is a luxury nature cannot afford. I am an old man now. My time is short. The river is coming for me again, and this time, no giant hand will pull me out. But before I go, I have a warning for you. A final benediction. Stop looking for them. Stop going into the woods with your cameras and your calls. Stop trying to find the truth. You don't want to find what's out there. Because if you find them if you force them into a corner, you might find out what they are really guarding. You might find the other eaters. The patriarch's tribe was just one cell. One garrison guarding one gate. There are others, in the Rockies, in the Himalayas, in the Andes. They are the jailers. They are keeping the nightmares underground. And every time we encroach, every time we log a forest or drill a mine, we weaken the lock. We are scratching at the door of hell, thinking it's a treasure chest. Don't be like me. Don't be arrogant. Don't think your Bible, or your rifle, or your science will save you. When you step into the deep tree line, you are stepping out of God's jurisdiction. You are entering the food chain, and in that kingdom, you are not the king. You are the tithe. I pray for the patriarch, wherever he is. I pray he found a new valley. I pray Timothy grew strong. And I pray they never, ever trust a human again. Because the saddest thing I learned in 40 years of priesthood is this. The beast showed me mercy. The man showed him betrayal. We are the wolves. And God help us when the sheep finally decide to bite back.